Okay, so we've seen this spinal cord slice before, and now we're able to integrate because we've looked at the three layers of meninges. They have it color coded here nicely for you. They have the brownish dura mater, the blue arachnoid, and then the pink pia. And we see this stalk of spinal cord here with the spinal nerves projecting outward from the spinal cord. This part is the sensory information coming in from the body into the dorsal or posterior root of the spinal cord. This is the motor nerve that's leaving the anterior portion of the spinal cord through the ventral root. You see the anterior gray horn or posterior horn, the lateral gray horn, and the anterior or ventral gray horn here. And then they also go through and we get the posterior columns of white matter, the lateral columns of white matter, and the anterior columns of white matter. So we've looked at that in the distribution of gray and white matter in the spinal cord, but just reviewing never hurts, right? So gray matter, remember, involves the cell body. So in this region right in here, this gray matter is largely composed of cell bodies that of course possess no myelin, right? And then the white matter is going to be this white area that's myelinated, heavily myelinated for the most part. And these are going to be the axons. So this is very hierarchical, very organized, and we'll see that. And that's one of the remarkable features of the spinal cord and the brain is this hierarchy and delineation of gray matter and white matter. So cell bodies found in this butterfly region and surrounded by this rim of white axons, white myelinated axons. And just to review again, just to look at this again, just refresh your memory from the first video about the setup, the general anatomy of the spinal cord. It's going to serve you well for your next quiz, which I'm sure isn't too far off. Okay, so gray matter has the posterior gray horns, right? There's two of them, one on each side, since the spinal cord shows bilateral symmetry. These are where the sensory fibers are conducting to. They carry the information from the body, from all the receptors in the body that are detecting all the various aspects and status of the body and projecting it inward. And the axons are going to synapse on the cell bodies in this particular area, the posterior or dorsal gray horns. Then there are a bit thicker anterior gray horns or ventral, where we're having the motor fibers project out of into the ventral root. The gray commissure we talked about that has the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure that connect the right and left halves. So we'll see fibers that connect those two halves together. You'll have the lateral gray horn that is only present in the thoracic and lumbar segments of the spinal cord, because it is only in these segments that we have neurons associated with the sympathetic division of the nervous system. So that's the only place. So it does not exist in cervical or sacral portions of the spinal cord. Now, we can start to attach specific functions to regions of these gray horns in the posterior gray horn. And of course, this is on both sides. They're just showing it on one side for simplicity, right? You have the cell bodies that are going to be getting information from the somatic senses, and then further inward in the gray horn, in this sensory portion, we're going to have the visceral sensations, the cell bodies that are going to receive those inputs. For motor nuclei, this lateral gray horn is going to handle visceral motor outputs via the sympathetic outflow, and then the somatic to the skeletal muscles, right, primarily, we're going to have the cell bodies that will convey that information out the visceral route. How is the white matter organized? Quite simply into these major columns. Within each of these three columns, we're going to see that there are specific tracts and specific information being conveyed along them, and we can separate them based on what information they're carrying from what part of the body. And so we see these posterior white columns that take up the entire posterior portion of the white matter, the lateral white columns, and the interior white columns as well. Just want to show you the distribution of gray matter and white matter. Particularly gray matter is different in the cervical region versus the thoracic region, right? Certainly a vast difference in shapes of those two regions. White matter surrounds the gray matter, and again, it's the bundles of myelinated axons that are going up and down the spinal cord, and they are going to allow communication between different levels of the body and the brain. We've already covered those three white columns. These are not called nerves in the central nervous system, they're called tracts, or you may even see the term fasciculus. Okay, so now we don't call them nerves, we call them tracts. So tracts or fasciculi are just bundles or collections of axons. So we're going to see that in this white matter, there are tracts that go up the spinal cord to carry sensory information, and there are tracts that carry the information for motor output downward. So ascending tracts that we see labeled here on the left side, and again, this is just done for simplicity. These tracts also appear on the right side of the spinal cord. And in terms of the picture, in terms of left and right, and the descending tracts that are pictured here also appear on the left side. I just want to make that clear. So the ascending tracts carry the information, sensory information up, descending tracts carry motor information down. And when we break things apart into these tracts, into these superhighways, those axons are generally going to have similar origins, similar final destinations, and similar functions. Now, we're going to start covering some more terminology. Decussation is the crossing over of fibers. This is a really interesting aspect of function in the central nervous system, in that the right side of the brain is largely going to receive sensory information from the left side of the body, and also will project motor fibers for the most part to the left side of the body, and vice versa. The left side of the brain handles the right side of the body, and this is all due to this process of decussation, this crossing over of fibers, usually in the brain stem, but also occurs in the spinal cord quite a bit as well. So in this, given this aspect, we have to consider different terminology for position. Contralateral means that the origin and the destination are on opposite sides, whereas ipsilateral means they're on the same side. The origin and destination are on the same side, and thus these fibers don't decussate. So I just want to leave you with this picture of the sensory or ascending path. This is absolutely backwards here. This key, try to ignore that. But motor pathways should be descending pathways, and these are indeed descending pathways. This needs to be corrected. And the sensory are, of course, ascending pathways, and we see that indicated here. We're going to cover these pathways in more details here in the next video or two.